I walked into the grand ballroom ready to celebrate my sister's big moment, but before I could even lift my glass, she fired and humiliated me in front of everyone. My parents watched in silence. Security was called to escort me out. I was treated like I never existed. But 3 hours later, the tables turned, and the shock on their faces was one I'd waited years to see. The applause for Evelyn's inauguration still echoed faintly in the grand ballroom of the Grand Lakeside Hotel. Crystal chandeliers refracted the soft golden light across the marble floors, breaking it into 1,000 fractured stars that danced and shimmered with every movement. I hadn't even lifted my glass when her voice reached me. Calm, deliberate, surgical. "Grace," she said, every syllable precise. "You're terminated. Security will escort you out." The room froze. 500 people stopped mid-toast, mid-step, mid-laughter. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Chairs remained half-turned. Servers held trays mid-air. Crystal reflected light in harsh, angular shards. My parents stood rigid near the stage. Richard, my father, hands clasped, face neutral. Mary Ann, my mother, frozen in a perfect posture of disapproval disguised as inaction. Caleb, my younger brother, shifted nervously in his chair, pretending to check his phone. No one intervened. I didn't flinch. I didn't protest. I didn't speak. I placed the champagne glass down with careful precision, removed my laminated guest badge. Guest, not family, not executive, and set it beside the glass, aligning the edges perfectly. Then I walked toward the doors. The moment was over for them. They didn't know it was only the beginning. I've always been invisible in my family. Not ignored entirely, but always overlooked, always doing the work that no one acknowledged, always stabilizing the chaos that everyone else consumed as power or recognition. I first recognized the pattern when I was 16. Orion Consulting, our family's tech consulting company based in Minneapolis, was my entire world. We specialized in software solutions for mid-sized firms, helping them streamline accounting, reporting, and operational efficiency. The office smelled of printer ink, old carpeting, and faint ozone from aging servers. Evelyn, my sister, sat in her corner chair, flawless, scrolling her phone, poised as if she was born into command. Caleb, my younger brother by 3 years, perched lazily on the filing cabinet, tossing reports around like confetti, confident that titles would come to him regardless of effort. My father, Richard, focused on a televised baseball game in the corner, while my mother, Mary Ann, whispered polite words into her phone about social events. "Grace, check these invoices," Dad said, tossing a stack toward me without looking up. "Make sure nothing is wrong." I nodded, flipping through the pages. Evelyn smirked. "You always make it complicated," she said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a critique. It was a judgment delivered with surgical precision. That day, I realized my role in the family. Invisible. Indispensable. Unnoticed. Childhood memories flooded back like slow, relentless tides. I was 8 when I first noticed credit disappearing. At a family Thanksgiving, I suggested a small organizational adjustment for the office, a change that later saved a major client account. Evelyn presented it as her idea. Caleb smiled, my parents nodded approvingly, and I quietly wrote down every step I had taken in my small ledger, recording truth nobody else would remember. By 10, I was staying up late to fix software bugs, ensuring projects ran smoothly while Evelyn presented the results as if they were her triumphs. Caleb nodded confidently at board meetings, repeating phrases I had coached him to use. My parents praised him. I logged everything. By 12, I began maintaining the continuity files, meticulously organized digital and physical records of emails, contracts, overlooked clauses, amendments, and internal memos. Every oversight, every tiny error, every act of negligence, catalogued with precision. I had a habit now. What others ignored, I preserved. What they mishandled, I corrected. Teenage years hardened me further. I learned to anticipate problems before they became crises. By 16, I could predict Evelyn's oversights, Caleb's blunders, and even the distracted inattention of my parents. One afternoon, a client threatened to cancel a multimillion-dollar contract over a shipping error. Evelyn panicked. Caleb shrugged. Dad muttered, "Fix it." I did. Alone. Hours later, the client renewed, satisfied. Evelyn took credit at the next board meeting. Caleb smiled, and my parents nodded, oblivious. I updated the continuity files. Every decision logged. Every solution time-stamped. By 18, I had started drafting my own contracts and amendments. I slipped a minor ownership amendment to Dad while he was absorbed in a televised baseball game. He signed without reading. That signature became a cornerstone, a latent power waiting to be activated. By 20, I had internalized invisibility as power. I could manipulate outcomes, correct errors, and maintain the company's stability without acknowledgement. Every crisis I resolved, every loophole I closed, every mismanaged client relationship I salvaged. Quietly, invisibly, inevitably. Evelyn smiled for investors. Caleb relied on me for explanations he didn't understand. My parents assumed competence was natural. Recognition was irrelevant. Strategy, foresight, and control mattered. The gala arrived like a storm. The Grand Lakeside Hotel, historic and grand, towered over downtown Minneapolis. Golden light bounced across gilded mirrors and crystal chandeliers, reflecting in polished marble. I arrived 3 hours early. Staff rehearsed lighting transitions, tested microphones, adjusted chairs. I was listed as guest. Not family. Not executive. I observed. Every imperfection mattered. The centerpieces slightly off-center, the lights angled too low, staff misaligned. These weren't mistakes. They were leverage points. I catalogued them in my mind, noting everything for the moment it would matter. Memories crowded me, Evelyn taking credit, Caleb basking in praise, my parents congratulating the wrong person. Silence became strategy. Observation became power. Documentation became leverage. The moment arrived with brutal efficiency. Evelyn's announcement sliced through the ballroom. "You're terminated. Security will escort you out." The murmur rose. Guests glanced at one another, unsure, uncomfortable. Security moved toward me with slow, rehearsed precision. My parents remained statues. Caleb froze, momentarily conflicted, then retreated into passive compliance. I left quietly. Outside, the Minneapolis air was wet, sharp with drizzle. Streets reflected city lights like fractured glass. I didn't look back. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. 3 hours. That was all I needed. The garage smelled faintly of motor oil and ozone. My laptop was already charged. Every folder meticulously labeled. Contracts, amendments, board notes, archived emails, signed agreements nobody read. 16 years of invisible labor arranged in perfect order. I opened the continuity files. Every overlooked clause, every dismissed memo, every accidental signature, catalogued. I began the process I had prepared for over a decade. Sending pre-signed amendments to board members, alerting auditors, propagating encrypted updates across the company's digital infrastructure. Every overlooked clause, every ignored memo, every unchallenged signature now carried weight. 3 hours stretched like an eternity. I leaned back, fluorescent hum the only sound. My parents assumed silence meant submission. My siblings assumed invisibility meant weakness. They were wrong. I allowed myself to reflect. I remembered holiday parties I was excluded from because Evelyn wanted the spotlight. I remembered Caleb nodding at my recommendations as if they were intuition. I remembered Dad signing contracts mid-baseball game, Mom distracted by social calls, Evelyn charming investors, Caleb reclining, hands folded. I remembered every unnoticed effort, every correction, every quiet victory. I logged it all. Outside, life continued. Cars, streetlights, pedestrians. Inside the garage, years of preparation converged quietly. Upstairs, Evelyn smiled, Caleb exuded confidence. My parents nodded, proud. None realized that the foundation they had ignored for 16 years was about to turn on them. 3 hours. That was all I needed. The ballroom was still glittering with lights, with the sound of glasses clinking and small talk rising in uneven waves, when the first emails hit the board members' inboxes. I had timed everything perfectly. Every signature, every clause, every amendment I had archived for years now triggered in real time. It was subtle at first, a gentle ping, a small notification, an inconspicuous flag that drew no immediate attention. Evelyn leaned over the podium, smiling, unaware that the very foundation she thought was beneath her feet was quietly shifting. Caleb was chatting with a group of investors, his hand casually brushing over the papers he thought were his authority. My parents still nodded at each other, satisfied, believing that the night was a success. They had no idea the rules of the game had changed, silently, invisibly, irrevocably. I watched from the corner, quiet, calm, invisible. Every movement they made, every reaction, I catalogued for myself, for later, when the reckoning would be complete. I didn't rush. I didn't celebrate. That was not my way. Strategy had its own rhythm. Patience had its own weight. And tonight, the clock was mine. The first subtle shift came with a text message. One of the senior board members, someone who had always noticed the small details, who read every contract with a precision Evelyn and Caleb lacked, asked for clarification on a clause in the new governance structure. That clause was Section 14C, the one I had drafted and filed years ago, quietly tucked into the company bylaws. If a majority shareholder was removed without proper authorization, control would revert automatically. 3 months ago, Evelyn and Caleb had assumed control without reading the fine print. They had assumed power could be seized by charm and performance alone. But law and structure were patient. They never forgot. The murmurs started quietly at first. One investor leaned over to another. "Did you see this notice? Something's wrong with the appointments." Another whispered, "I thought this was all finalized last week." And then a third, "Section 14C? That shouldn't be active, right?" I remained in the shadows, letting the dominoes fall in silence. I wasn't angry. I wasn't reveling in vindication. I was merely letting the system I had maintained for 16 years speak for itself. By the hour, the room's atmosphere shifted. Evelyn's confident smile faltered. Caleb's posture stiffened. Guests looked down at their phones, checking the messages and notifications that had begun to flood their inboxes. Board members whispered urgently into earpieces. Security shifted from a passive presence to a cautious stance. The energy in the room changed from celebration to tension, subtle but unmistakable. I took a single step into the center of the room, carrying nothing but my laptop. The glow from the screens reflected off the polished marble floors, creating a faint halo around me. My heels clicked softly, rhythmically, drawing no attention beyond the instinctive acknowledgement of my presence. I didn't shout. I didn't gesture dramatically. I simply connected to the main display and opened the voting portal. "Good evening," I said, voice calm, measured. The microphone carried cleanly across the vast space. No drama. No accusation. Just facts. The screen behind me lit up with a single line. "Emergency shareholder motion. Section 14C activated." Gasps spread like ripples across the room. Evelyn's hands tightened on the podium. Caleb froze mid-conversation, eyes wide. My parents leaned forward, confusion creeping into their faces for the first time. The room, which had been buzzing with polite chatter, now hummed with silent panic. The first votes were tallied. 58% approval. Then 61%. 65%. Investors and board members, who had always trusted my diligence and foresight over the family's charm, began casting their votes. 67%. 69%. Every percentage point was an echo of the years of work I had performed in silence, every correction, every amendment, every unnoticed signature building to this singular moment. Evelyn's voice cracked when she tried to interrupt. "Grace, this This isn't how. Please step back, I said evenly. No emotion. No threat. Just authority born of preparation. Caleb attempted to appeal to family ties. Grace, come on. Mom, Dad, this is. Mom's hand trembled near her necklace. Dad blinked slowly, trying to read the screen but failing to understand the magnitude of what had been set in motion. Their assumptions of control, of natural authority, were collapsing silently, invisibly. The votes continued. 71%. 73%. 76%. The green blocks spread across the screen, each one a confirmation of the structural inevitability I had orchestrated. Guests whispered, some checking phones, others turning to watch the unfolding event with a mix of disbelief and fascination. The clinking of glasses had long since stopped. The atmosphere was charged, taut with anticipation. By the time the final votes were cast, the reversal was complete. Section 14C had executed automatically. Control reverted to me as the majority shareholder. The room held its breath. Evelyn and Caleb stood frozen, their titles stripped in an instant, their confidence evaporating into shocked silence. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I closed my laptop softly, the sound echoing like a punctuation mark in the stunned quiet. This wasn't revenge. This was order. This was structure asserting itself against neglect and oversight. The aftermath was immediate but subtle. Evelyn listed her lake house for sale within weeks. Caleb attempted to negotiate positions outside the company but found the non-compete clauses I had quietly maintained for years were airtight. My parents retreated to Florida, seeking solace in familiarity, avoiding the questions they had ignored for 16 years. I spent the following days auditing every corner of Orion Consulting. Every system, every process, every employee was realigned. Errors that had persisted for years were corrected quietly. Contracts were updated. Internal communications streamlined. Policies enforced consistently. The company, which had always relied on appearances and charm, now relied on structure and precision. And I became the face of that stability. Board meetings, once chaotic stages for Evelyn's charisma, became exercises in measured discussion and informed decision-making. Caleb, who had relied on inherited status, struggled to adapt to a world where diligence and preparation mattered more than entitlement. Evelyn's charisma alone no longer carried weight. I held the room not with theatrics but with the silent authority of knowing every detail, every precedent, every contingency. The real power, I had learned, was quiet. It wasn't in speeches or smiles. It wasn't in applause or handshakes. It was in the documents no one read, in the signatures they ignored, in the processes they took for granted. And I had spent 16 years cultivating that power in silence. Friends, colleagues, and investors began to notice the difference immediately. Projects that had stagnated under mismanagement began to flourish. Clients returned, impressed with the sudden efficiency and clarity of communication. Employee morale improved under consistent leadership. What had once been chaos disguised as charm became order, predictability, and trust. Yet, I remained invisible publicly, careful not to overshadow the public image Evelyn had built, not because I cared about appearances, but because strategy required patience. Power exercised without need for recognition was absolute. One evening, I watched the sunset over the Minneapolis skyline from my office, the city moving with indifferent energy beneath me. I thought about the years I had spent fixing mistakes unnoticed, patching crises silently, and preparing for this night. The sense of satisfaction was not about triumph over family. It was the knowledge that competence, diligence, and foresight, not charm, entitlement, or distraction, had finally been recognized as the true foundation of the company. Evelyn's calls went unanswered. Caleb's attempts at negotiation stalled. My parents sent messages I did not read. Their apologies, their explanations, their rewritten memories, irrelevant. Structure had spoken. Consequences had executed. And the company moved forward, aligned, steady, resilient. I leaned back in my chair, allowing the hum of the office systems to fill the room. Silence, I realized, was not weakness. It was direction. Invisibility was not submission. It was power, cultivated, measured, and unleashed at the precise moment when it mattered most. The city below was unaware of the quiet revolution that had just unfolded in its heart. The gala, the applause, the perceived victories, all irrelevant. The foundation had shifted. Orion Consulting was no longer a family theater. It was a structure of precision and foresight, and I was its guardian, its director, its force of inevitable consequence. And for the first time, after 16 years of watching, waiting, and preparing, I was truly finally seen. Not by applause, not by recognition, not by fragile titles or empty praise. Seen by the one measure that mattered: results, structure, and authority. I closed my eyes for a moment, allowing the enormity of the past and the certainty of the future to settle in. 3 hours had been all it took. 3 hours of preparation, patience, and quiet execution. Years of invisibility culminated in a single undeniable truth. I was the backbone, the unacknowledged force, the one who had ensured stability while others chased spotlight. And now, at last, the world, and my family, had to recognize it. Moral lessons. This story reminds us that true power and influence often lie not in visibility or recognition, but in patience, preparation, and consistency. Grace teaches us that being overlooked does not mean being powerless. Every quiet effort, every detail you master, and every principle you uphold builds a foundation that can support extraordinary outcomes. It encourages us to document, plan, and act with foresight, even when others take credit or underestimate us. The story also emphasizes the importance of resilience. Setbacks, humiliation, and exclusion do not define your worth or your potential. Finally, it shows that silence and composure, when paired with strategy and competence, can be far more transformative than impulsive reactions, reminding us to trust the process and stay committed to our own path, no matter how invisible it may feel at the moment.